Hello, how are you? And once again, welcome back to the channel. Recently, there have been a lot of discussions about the long-range meta and some of the game's most popular ranged weapons, like the krig or the C58, have been nerfed. As a result of this, many players are currently concerned about the long-term meta. Yes, the game is adequate, but is it superior to this weapon? This gun, on the other hand, is a little difficult to use. Should I use it instead of this one because it has better stats? So today we're going over the long range meta, what weapons you should be looking for in long range meta, and what weapons are statistically going right now with the current TTK and the meta in Warzone. Let's take a look at some of our long term options, the RAAL and the Bruin MK9 and the MG82 are my current choices for the best long range weapons in the game. Surprisingly, the AK-47 from the Cold War, the nerfed C58, the nerfed EM2, and the krig will all be explained. So we're looking at headshots here, and we're going to every single type of body when it comes to damage and dealt with whatnot. 250 health, and we can see that for most parts, things are relatively close to 26 meters, and it's relatively close competition at about 15 milliseconds. There is a difference between the last one, which is going to be our blue MG82 at the top. So the AK-47 from the Cold War is the worst up close and the greatest up close, and it's close competition at first. But of course, we're focusing on the long range, which I would consider to be about 25 meters and beyond. Anything beyond the first drop is a bit of a longer range engagement, especially when you're in a 40 to 50 or even 60 meter long range engagement. And you can see it's pretty close race there, with the C58 coming in second. With the headshots, you would have to be the best TTK over the range of any other rifles on this list, except for the EM2, which isn't far behind. When compared to the EM2, the C58 is a more user-friendly. The EM2 has a lot of recoil, especially when it becomes visual bounce. Hitting headshots consistently is going to be very difficult. As a result, the TTK, that's very close to the C58. Using the Bruin is a lot more difficult, but is also very competitive in this meta. When you hit a headshot, you notice that the C58 as well as the EM2 are right there with it. The row is nearly complete, and the firing is slow. There's no significant drop off, and the AK is one of the decreases in height, and that's roughly around the line in the row. The MG82 isn't really a factor when it comes to headshots, and the krig is decent at first, but then it falls apart. So the krig is a no-go when it comes to headshots. We can now move on to chest shots, where this situation is somewhat similar. The krig is still not hanging this krig. I just don't believe it's worth it any longer, especially in long range battles. You might be able to get away when you're trying to make more of a close range shot, but it simply cannot compete with any other guns in terms of range. The teal line, the MG82, they are great, and the nicest TTK can all be seen up close. It has been the drop off after that and is the best over range. But the MG82, like the EM2, has somewhat insane recoil and is difficult to handle compared to most of the other guns. If you want to use the MG82, you need to understand the recoil pattern and how to deal with it if you're at a long range, or when your targets are small and you're making fine adjustments to your aim. However, statistically, the MG82 will pay off the most if you're hitting the shots, because it has a very good TTK over range, while the EM2, like the Bruin, will still be quite good, but not as good. We look at the C52, and it's not just like chest shots, as it once was. It does not have a great TTK up close, and then there's a drop off, making it the second worst, because there are only a few steps ahead of the krig. The C58 chest shots won't be as effective as they once were. The roll is back, but it's not competing like the Bruin and the AK-47. It's just through and through with no damage and drop off. It starts well close up because we know how good it is up close, but it falls apart over range and ends up being in the middle of the pack when it comes to chest shots at least. Let's take another look at chest shots. Up close, both the MG82 and the AK are fantastic, but the AK has a drop off that is more in line with the Bruin, which does not. MG82 is the best of the best when it comes to TTK over range. the EM2 is not that far behind, though recoil is an issue on both of them, making it more difficult to hit targets consistently. If you can, however, the TTK is insane. So far with all of these new loadouts, I found that the Bruin is in the middle of the pack, but it is also very simple to use. So, if you're not confident with your recoil, control over the range, and some extremely long range engagements, don't use it. It is extremely simple, and while it does not have the best TTK, it'll be most straightforward to use. So if you're missing shots of the EM2 or MG82, the Bruin is always the culprit. As the AK drops off and the Bruin is in line, it might be worthwhile to use the Bruin. The krig is extremely bad here in the stomach, with the worst TTK up close and the worst TTK over range. The row does come into a halt here, so it's not great over range. And the C58 is mediocre at first and falls off short, being over range. Finally, let's consider the extremities, except for headshots. This is one area where the MG82 falls short. It does drop off, but only becomes the pack's focal point. TTK, the M2 has stood the test of time and has no drop off here, but we're considering that the Bruin through and through, and in the middle of the pack is the recoil, as well as the AK grid up close to the overrange. It's in the middle, and the AK has a pleasant recoil. The krig doesn't, the row does, and the C58 is good at first, but not much so later. If you're consistently competent and accurate player, the MG82 and the EM2 are, in my opinion, your best chances to cross the range. In general, the Bruin is the most straightforward and consistent of the bunch. It's always in the middle of the pack, and it's always extremely competitive of all the other weapons over range, with no drop off or the worry of missing shots regularly as a result of disproportionately large recoil. The MG82 and the EM2 will kick a lot, and hitting targets over range will be more difficult, but I do believe that the Bruin will be the best bet overall for all players who are just simply average. But if you're truly an exceptional player, you're going to have to use the EM2 and MG82. You know, they recoil and are skilled mastering those patterns, though I still use the C58. In my situation, it will not scale quickly enough for range fights. Of course, for long range meta, let's jump right in and dissect some setups. The EM2 is a type of EM1. For what it's worth, I too use this long range weapon. It's also great for sniper support, but for range, it's pretty much a copy and paste of the C58 agency task. Force field, Agent 40 round 3 times optic setup. I just go with the basic suppressor and give the task force rangers if you wanted sniper support. As a result, you have fewer mobility drops and will be switched 3 times. Remember that EM2 is still excellent for the MG82. This isn't an easy weapon to use long range, and you have to deal with a lot of recoil in order to land your shots and get a good TTK. With this piece, I'd recommend the agency suppressor for this, as it will help recoil task force, range velocity, and recoil field agents. This is a long range meta in my perspective at the moment, and that'll be the end of today's video. Which according to you has the best TTK? Which of your personal favorites is in the long range meta? Anyways, thanks for watching and stay tuned. Bye bye.